So every Friday night, Shauna and I give a blessing to each of our children. Sometimes these blessings are moments of calm and reflection, and other times they're a little chaotic with kids exhausted from a week of school, patients are running thin, and possibly there might even be wrestling matches that we have to interrupt for Shabbat blessings. But each week we seem to find that special moment with each of the kids. And yet, as I was thinking about it this week and reading several commentaries on the parsha, I found myself asking an interesting question. Who is the blessing for? How much of the blessing is something that I, as the one bestowing the blessing, am giving over to my child in that moment, and how much is it something that I need? That moment of connection. And then, what does the blessing give each of us in that moment? There's no doubt that blessings have the power to change people and even change the whole world. But who they change and how they impact them are something that's worth spending a little bit of time discussing. And to do that, we're going to look at a central source of the Shabbat parental blessing that occurs in this week's parsha. I apologize to those at home. Due to technological difficulties, I was not able to share online the source sheet. But the majority of the sources are from this week, and I will read them out loud so that you can, of course, follow along. The first source on your source sheet: while living in Egypt, Joseph had 2 sons. And what's interesting is what he named them. Joseph named the firstborn, and I read, this is Genesis chapter 41, verses 51 through 52. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, and it says, "For God has caused me to forget all my toil in my father's house." And the word for forget is nashani, and nashani is related to Manasseh in the Hebrew, Manasseh, nashani. So because God has caused me or allowed me to forget all of my chores from my father's house, I'm naming my child Forgetfulness. And the second one he named Ephraim, for, quote, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Now, the word for fruitful here is Hephrani. Hephrani, it's a biblical word for fruitful, but this one I'm naming Forgetfulness, and this one I'm naming a piece of fruit. Something like that. But nevertheless, what's important is that these 2 children were named for reasonings that had to do with forgetting, leaving, abandoning the Jewish people. What? It doesn't make sense. Okay, you guys can talk back to me. This is the give and take here. It doesn't make sense. Correct. But Joseph, remember, his brothers sold him. Nobody came to rescue him. Dad didn't come to rescue him. Could have. Did Dad muster the troops? No. So I'm going to forget it all, and I'm going to name my kid. I'm so much wanting to forget it that I'm going to name my kid Forgetfulness to remind me every time I say this kid's name that I'm supposed to forget something. Even more complicated. Now we come to this week's portion, chapter 48, verses 1 through 22, but I've taken out a bunch. And this is after Jacob has come down, the brothers came down, everybody's there, happy family reunion. Jacob is about to die, and so he calls Joseph. And Jacob said to Joseph, "Now your 2 sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to Egypt shall be mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine no less than Reuben and Shimon." He adopts them as his own. And in the same setting, he just said, I'm adopting those 2 kids. And then what does he say? Who are these 2 kids? Who are these 2 kids? Wait a second, you just adopted them and now you're asking who they are? What's that, Debbie? It's a little hard to understand, correct. And Joseph said to his father, "These are my sons, whom God has given me here." So the first lesson that I think about blessings is that blessings allow us to overlook foibles, to overlook mistakes, and to overlook realities that might cause us animosity. Joseph could have been very angry at Jacob and said, "You just adopted them, you took them away from me, and now you're asking who they are? They're my kids, darn it!" But he doesn't. He calmly says, "These are my kids that God gave me." He's patient with his older father, who's having a senile moment, perhaps. Or he only heard of them and he's now meeting them, but they're standing right next to him. So, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Jacob is getting ready to bless all of his children. And now he wants to add in Manasseh and Ephraim. Ooh, for those that didn't hear, Chuck, that was fantastic. Chuck said, "I know all the other kids that I'm going to give a blessing to, but I don't know enough about Ephraim and Manasseh. Tell me something about them so I can bless them." I like it. I like it. I like it. And then Jacob says, "Bring them up to me that I may bless them." And he blessed Joseph, saying, "The God in whose ways my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd from birth to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all harm, Malach HaGoaloti, bless the lads. In them may my name be recalled, and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they be teeming multitudes upon the earth." And so he blessed them that day, saying, "By you, to Ephraim and Manasseh, shall Israel invoke blessing, saying, God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." And we know that we say to our boys, "Yisimcha Elohim ke Ephraim ke Manasseh." We say, "May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." Now, for the girls, we say, "Yisimech Elohim ke Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah." May God make you like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Wouldn't it, in a parallel world, make more sense to say, "May God make you like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob"? Why do we say Ephraim and Manasseh? I want you to turn your page over. We're going to do this a little quickly, but we can talk about it later at Kiddush. Because why do we continue to bless our children every Friday night in the names of these two children? They have Egyptian names based on Joseph's desire to distance himself from his family of origin. These two boys grew up in Egypt with no knowledge of their Jewish connection. They lived amongst Egyptian royalty as a spoiled life. And they had no familial connection or baggage. None. So why these two boys come down as the boys of blessing? Ephraim and Manasseh, here's a couple different reasons. I'm going to bring you three reasons. Ephraim and Manasseh were the only two siblings where there's no record of sibling rivalry. Later in Isaiah, there's references to the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh going at each other. But the two boys themselves, no instance of sibling rivalry. The Yalkut Yehuda writes that Ephraim and Manasseh were the first two Jewish children born in exile. So Jewish parents bless their children, asking God to help them keep their identity intact despite all the temptations and distractions of diaspora life. Where I want to focus is, of course, on the sage Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who writes the following: I heard, however, a most lovely explanation based on the Zohar from my revered predecessor, Lord Jacobitz of blessed memory. He said that though there are many instances in the Torah and Tanakh in which parents bless their children, this is the only example of a grandparent blessing a grandchild. Between parents and children, he said, there are often tensions. Parents worry about their children. Children sometimes rebel against their parents. The relationship is not always smooth, but not so with grandchildren, writes Rabbi Sachs. There, the relationship is one of love, untroubled by tension or anxiety. When a grandparent blesses a grandchild, they do so with a full heart. That is why this blessing by Jacob to his grandchildren became the model of blessing across generations. Anyone who has had the privilege of having grandchildren will immediately understand the truth and depth of this explanation. Turn the page over, and we see that there's two versions of a text, one in the Talmud from Babylon and one from the Talmud of Jerusalem, Yerushalmi. And both of them talk about a grandchild, about teaching Torah. And it says, anyone who teaches his son's son Torah, his grandson Torah, the verse gives him the credit as though he received it from Mount Sinai. But in the Yerushalmi, the same Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, is quoted in saying it slightly different. And it says, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi used to hear the lesson of his grandson every Friday. He was taught by his grandson. He didn't teach his grandson. He was taught by his grandson every Friday. Once he forgot, went to the bathing in the public baths in Tiberias. In the middle of the bath, he remembered that he had not heard his grandson's lesson. He turned around and left in the middle of the bath, got dressed and left. And Rabbi Chia bar Abba said, did not our teacher, meaning Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, teach us that if you started the bath, you shouldn't interrupt it for anything until you're done? And Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi responded back to Rabbi Chia and said to him, Chia, my son, is that unimportant in your eyes? For anyone who hears the lesson from his grandchild, it's as if he heard it from Sinai. There's something about a blessing from a grandfather or a grandparent to a grandchild. And King David wrote, and you shall live to see your children's children learning Torah, and then there will be peace in Israel. When grandparents and grandchildren are able to share a blessing, there can bring peace that no other peace can exist like it. So, on this Shabbat, as we close out the book of Bereshit, we think about the power of blessings, that blessings can bring peace when they're shared across generations. Shabbat Shalom.